I mean to say that it's an honor, a privilege. It's kind of really very, how to say, overused words, but I really mean them to say to have Father Alexander with us. He was my professor at St. Vladimir Seminary of Canon Law, and I took from his class importance to look at the sources. He shared with us reconstruction of this collection of Pontus. It's like one of the first canonical collections. So, and then when Jordanville started to open up at the beginning of the century, Father Alexander went and gave us a talk about his dissertation, which he defended at Pontifical Institute in Rome under supervision of the late Father Robert Taft. So he and Father John Bear, they were among the first people who would come here around year 2001 and start rub shoulders and exchange ideas with us. So then Father Alexander continuously supported our work in this class despite his busy schedule, because he is a chancellor. We just recently received this information that he is now going to be back full time at St. Vladimir's, and he's stepping down from his post of the Chancellor of the Orthodox Church in America, not something that we have in the Russian Church abroad. So, what is exactly Chancellor, Father? What is your position?
Oh, essentially, I serve as the first priest of the Orthodox Church in America and the chief administrative officer for the church, and then the chief counselor for his beatitude.
Right, right, right. So this is very unique position, very unique position. So thank you, Father. Thanks so much for being with us today. And we did some readings along the lines what you shared with us in your previous meeting. So we read Thomas already, and also what was another reading, Father John?
Um, Let me pull up exactly what was the title of it. Give me
Okay.
one second.
In the meantime, so we are having Dean Shidlovsky with us, and we are having Father Lawrence, who is the Russian Church abroad priest from the Philippines.
Oh,
So I'm
great.
a priest. Then we are having Father John Golovin from the Republic of California. And
Brilliant.
basically, and also we are recording for one student from Austria who kind of attends this class. So that basically our group, and we are missing a deacon from Spain, Jorge, who kind of maybe will show up later on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
I just want to add, yeah. So the other reading was Russian Autocephaly and the Orthodox in America. That was published by the Orthodox Observer Press in
Right. That's
1962.
I get it's a Greek source.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. This is Greek source which sided to some extent with the Russian Church abroad in critical evaluation of autocephaly. So the floor is yours, Father.
So good evening, everyone, and thank you for your patience with me. I was originally scheduled to speak with you on Thursday, then it was supposed to be this afternoon, and then it was in the evening. And when Protodeacon Andre first contacted me, I said, I'm happy to do this as always, but you have to be patient with me because many things come up on a regular basis. Anyway, so thank you for your patience with me. I'm very happy to be to come and speak with you this evening on this topic. And what the protodeacon has asked me to reflect on is reflections on the autocephaly of the Orthodox Church in America. And I'm going to do that in three steps. I'm going to reflect on autocephaly as an ecclesiological reality from my perspective. You might have heard others speak about this, and you might have gotten this from other readings, but from my perspective, about that. And then I want to speak a little bit more on, particularly about the OCA. And so I want to test what I assert in that first part by describing what is in the OCA's autocephaly. And then I want to reflect on the autocephaly of the Orthodox Church in America after some 50 years. Okay. The first thing I want to say is the concept of autocephaly as we have it now in the Orthodox world is it has to be acknowledged, and it can't be otherwise, is a brand new ecclesiological principle. When I say that, I don't mean to say that it's wrong or it's incorrect, somehow unorthodox or whatnot, but it is very much a new concept that exists in the Orthodox world. There is no, you can take no recourse, find no canon that speaks about uh, church a local church akin to what we think about when we think of autocephalous. There are no canons that describe that reality. Nevertheless, it's a reality that we have, and it's a reality that we have for various reasons. Some of them I'll get to, some of them I haven't explored well enough the concept. Just to kind of lay it out there, I'm sure Protodeacon Andre can, if he hasn't already addressed this, the canons that speak about church structures above the level of a city. So, just to speak very quickly, a kind of a review of the canonical tradition, the canons speak about a bishop in a city. And when we think about that, we need to think about the city and the area around it. Um, so, a city in some sort of given geographical area, that bishop would have his a see in that city, and the surrounding countryside, the smaller villages, the towns, and whatnot. Okay, and that was a bishop's district. There's no easy way of saying this in modern languages. The canons speak about a bishop in his city, and you're meant to understand all the churches in the city and all of the places in the surrounding countryside. And that's primarily the canonical focus with regard to the episcopacy is bishops in their city. The one other layer that the canons speak extensively about is what happens when you gather all of those cities together. And the geographical reality that you get according to Roman civil geographical terms is the province, the eparchy. And in that eparchy, you have bishops in cities, and they're presided over by a bishop of the principal city, the mother city of that given province, which we know as the metropolis. And that the bishop of the metropolis has just taken on the title, shorthand, the metropolitan. And so what you have described in the canons is a very small set, if you will, of church ecclesiological structures, bishops in their city and bishops in a province. This is not to say, of course, that there aren't canons that speak about church structures above provinces. So just as you would gather cities together into a province, you gather provinces into dioceses, and dioceses again are Roman imperial geographical terms. So dioceses are a collection of provinces, and the dioceses would be, Egypt or Antioch, Thrace, Asia, Pontus. In the West, there are a few dioceses also. These dioceses were collections of provinces. And then there is, of course, only one or two canons that speak above a church level above these diocesan structures. And primarily those are the canons that speak about the Church of Rome or the church in Constantinople, which has an authority given to it unique in the canonical tradition of having an authority over a number of dioceses. It's an enormous territory that he has authority over. Now, when I say that, there's still nothing akin to what we have with regard to autocephalous churches. And so if I can move now from talking about what's not found in the canonical tradition and with regard to the canons themselves, And again, I don't want to say the concept of autocephaly is somehow uncanonical, unorthodox. It's a reality that is present in our lives, okay? And that's fine. It's part of the canonical tradition. But I want to move from the particular canons and the canonical ecclesiological structures that exist and just maybe lay out a few presuppositions of what we mean when we say autocephalous. Autocephalous, of course, etymologically means self-headed, so implicit in that term is that a church is self-governing. It is headed by itself. So you say it governs itself, and primarily when it governs itself, the primary sign of that is it elects its own primate without reference to another church. So an autonomous church, for example, the Church of Finland just elected a new archbishop. I think it was a classmate of Protodeacon Andres. He's now Archbishop Elia, but he was at the time Matti Wahlberg, a Finnish national. So when he was elected, he was nominated by his church, the Autonomous Church in Finland, and he had his election confirmed by the Autocephalous Church of Constantinople. That's an autonomous. An autocephalous church, though, has no confirmation of the primate. So when Patriarch Daniel, the most recently elected primate of an autocephalous church, I believe, was elected by the Bulgarian church. His election, took place according to the norms, the structures within the Bulgarian church. The Patriarch of Constantinople was there, but he took no part in the election. He took part in the enthronement, but had nothing to do with the election of the bishop. Because as an autocephalous church in the modern world, the principal sign that the church is self-governing is the ability to elect its own primate without reference to another church to confirm that election. Okay, that's number one. Number two, and this will come into play in our discussion down the road, the other principle of an autocephalous church is that it has unique territorial jurisdiction over a given geographical area. Stands to reason. I mean, the Church of Russia has the unique territorial jurisdiction over the Russian Federation and other areas, of course, part of the old Soviet Union, Russian Federation, these sorts of things. The church in Romania, unique territorial jurisdiction over the Romanian state, so to speak. So there is a uniqueness implicit with regard to autocephaly, self-governed, and it is the only church in that area. Now, of course, we all know about the modern realities, which we have to get to, and that's part of the story of the Orthodox Church in America. So just hold on to that. But so you elect your own primate, self-governing, unique territorial jurisdiction, and in some churches, one other feature with regard to what makes a church autocephalous is that church confects its own chrism. Not every church that we would say is autocephalous does this, but some churches do and consider it a unique sign, another unique sign that they're autocephalous and not autonomous or not just a metropolitan province within an autocephalous church. Okay, so that's the base level of what it means. I think what is commonly understood to mean that a church is autocephalous. Now, now I would like to move on to some reflections on autocephaly, what it is with the baseline. I think one of the things that you should have detected in what I say, like the Church of Romania has unique territorial jurisdiction in Romania, Serbia, Bulgaria, Russia, and whatnot, is this nationalist association with many churches with regard to their territory. And indeed, I would put forward, perhaps as somewhat of a controversial position, but I think it's irrefutable. You really can't argue too much about it, is that the rise of the notion of what an autocephalous church is bound up inexorably, completely with the rise of modern nation states. And is bound up, with the movement of nation states that takes place after the Treaty of Westphalia, to the modern world. I would just note, parenthetic, anecdotally, okay? In June, I was in Chernivtsi in Ukraine with His Beatitude Metropolitan Onufry and visiting other people with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. While I was there, we had the opportunity, the wonderful opportunity to go to the the university there in Chernivtsi, which is beautiful. Oh my goodness, it's spectacular. The metropolitan who used to be there in Chernivtsi, the metropolitan formerly of Bukovina, was the metropolitan of Bukovina and Dalmatia, two non-contiguous territories, one on the Adriatic and one this area of Ukraine that goes down into Romania. Um, and it exactly cuts across every modern conception of what a church is. There it is in Chernivtsi, Ukraine. But at the time when the university was really active and a principal Orthodox university, the language of instruction was in German. People from Bulgaria, Romania, Serbia, Montenegro, Ukraine, Russia, no doubt, Poland, no doubt, all came there and lived in that city. The principal languages of the city were no doubt Romanian, Ukrainian, Bukovinian dialect. There was no one country for all of that area. In fact, the geographical boundaries of Romania and Ukraine are completely artificial when you look at the culture of that country, and you can see it again anecdotally. The food I received that I ate in Chernivtsi is exactly the same food I received in Putna Monastery in northern Romania. I know too in Putna, great monastery, unbelievably beautiful, continuous monastic presence for over 600 years. They talk about it as being the seat of Romanian nationalism, and I forget the principal saint who's there, Saint Stephen, um, who was the founder of the Romanian nation, et cetera. They have a great museum, and all of the burial cloths and so many of the textiles they have from his time, epitaphia, grave clothes that would be draped over the tombs. They're all in Church Slavonic. They're not in Romania. I don't know how you can say that he's necessarily this great Romanian figure. I suppose he is. I don't know the history well enough, but our modern conception of nation states rests uneasily over the church, both its history and its ecclesiological concepts. An outgrowth that we have right now at this present moment is, as I say, the concept of autocephaly. It is very much bound up in nationalist sentiments. So please keep that in mind. We also, I would say, that's my first reflection on autocephaly. The second one, that's an observation, socio-political, cultural, historical. From a perspective of faith and what each of us profess on a regular basis, I note that we do not profess belief in either a local or an autocephalous church. When we recite the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed, we profess a regular belief in the Catholicity of the church. Yeah, we don't say, and I believe in one holy Catholic, autocephalous, and local church. We say, I believe in one Catholic and Apostolic Church. Now, to be sure, we profess the belief that the church is Catholic. It's universal. Yes, it stretches from end to end of the universe, 100%. To make sure that the church is Catholic, it has to be localized, however. Obviously, you have to speak the word of God in every language so that everybody can understand the saving message. When the Christ at the end of Matthew's gospel, go into all the world and teach what I have, taught you. Basically, use the words that I have taught you. We can't just go and speak in Aramaic or Greek. You have to speak in the language and the cultural idiom, of all of the entire world. As a young man, I was so deeply inspired by the vision of this that I received from one of the priests that was so formational with me, Father Matej Matej, a Serbian priest, who was the first person to speak to me about St. Cyril and Methodius and the bringing of the Slavs, exactly, the bringing of the Slavs into the Christian world. That you could speak in Slavonic, not in Hebrew, not in Latin, not in Greek, but also in Slavonic, and that Slavonic was a legitimate expression of faith, of the faith that we have received. I was captivated by that, and I remain captivated by Slavic Orthodoxy. I consider all of the other things, the breaking of the unity of the Orthodox Church to be a number of things to be just completely nonsense. But in any way, in order for the church, as I say, to be Catholic, it must be local. And somehow the church has to exist at one and the same time as being universal, one, but at the same time having a multiplicity of localities. Yeah, it has to subsume. And I would think that in a way, the only analogy for that would be something like in music. If we each start speaking one or two things at the same time, it just sounds like a bunch of clutter. But only music, holding together of a number of notes that make, go from one note to a chord to the complexity of a chord. That's the only thing that I think, very much adequately captures the idea of the church being one and many at the same time. Okay? So that's kind of historical, faith. And then I would just say, from a canonical perspective, fundamentally for me, autocephaly, the concept of autocephaly, the modern concept of autocephaly, can only be sufficient, can only serve the church, provided that it works along the lines of any of the great ecclesiological formulations that are found in the canonical tradition. That is to say, autocephaly can only work, can only be salvific, can only be helpful for the church if it serves as a tool to maintain the unity and the communion of the church. If it doesn't do that, then if it doesn't do that, then it's simply not of use for the church. Now, what do I mean by that? All of the ecclesiological formulations, what I talked about, bishop in a city, provinces, dioceses, the canonical formulations vis-a-vis the Patriarch of Constantinople or the Pope in Rome that are spoke about in the ancient canons, they only get their force provided that they hold together the church, that they keep the churches in communion. The canonical presuppositions are there to make sure that people of the same faith remain in communion with each other through disagreements, through fighting, through petty whatever. We all know what happens. The canons are not there to then splice people away. Well, you don't get along with me, you disagree, or you did this, that, or the other thing. The canons are there to keep everybody together. People of the same faith have to be in communion with each other. Again, we believe in one Catholic Church. If churches split off and are not in communion while maintaining the same faith, something tragically has gone wrong. So, autocephaly, as with any ecclesiological point, has to serve this point to maintain the unity of the church. Now, I would want to speak to this just for a moment for a moment longer, to say this, that unity, the communion, is both an internal communion and an external communion. Okay? Internally, when you break up, if you will, I shouldn't say that. When you localize the church, let me say that. When you localize the church so that you have people in a distinct region with distinct culture, practices, traits, we speak English, not French. We speak English, not Spanish, or they speak Spanish, not English, Greek, not Slavic, and so on. When you have a group of people in those geographical areas or these designated areas, you have to hold them all to communion. And so a church that is able to do that, maintain the unity internally, that is what I would say an autocephalous church. Somehow they're able to gather together a people who have the same faith and who are like-minded culturally, politically, something like that. Yeah, so you hold that together. But also, because the church is Catholic, that same sort of unity has to be maintained with every other of these localized Catholic churches. That is to say, the church in Russia has to remain in communion with the church in Serbia, Serbia with Bulgaria, Bulgaria with Romania, but Romania with Greek, and so on and such. Okay? It has to be that way. That's the way the system works. Okay? So, again, autocephaly, like any of the canonical tradition, is there above all to maintain the communion of the churches. By communion, unity, I mean internally and externally. Okay. So I'd like to move on now to the second part of what I say and test these assertions with regard to the Orthodox Church in America. Now, the fundamental question with regard to the autocephaly of the Orthodox Church in America was, in 1971, when the autocephaly was given, it's like, what are you going to do? basically. What were we going to do? The Metropolia, which turned into the Orthodox Church in America, had been in, Alaska, Canada, Alaska, North America, from Alaska down to California, in North America, into Mexico, for by the 1970s, not exactly 200 years, but coming close, maybe 175 years. Immediately in the after World War II, the Metropolia had found itself out of communion with the its mother church, the Patriarch of Moscow, and in that time, it was trying to find itself in get itself into some canonical regularity. That is to say, straighten out its relationship with Moscow. We all know in that period of time, in the 60s, in the 50s, the 60s, and then just into the beginning of the 70s, was not a great time of openness with regard to the Soviet Union and America. So the question is, what are you going to do? The church by that point, as I said, had existed in the United States, Canada, for many, many years. So it had received a very fragile maturity, not a great maturity, but a very fragile maturity, already doing things, with some independence. Institutions, churches were found, building up and whatnot. But the question is, what can be done? How can you achieve this canonical regularity? I have to say, at the outset, of course, at the time of the Cold War, it was inconceivable that the church would go back to the Moscow Patriarchate as part of the Soviet Union. I mean, just none of you are old enough. I certainly was not, to imagine like the church in the midst of the Red Scare or the Cuban Missile Crisis or something like this, having the Metropolia go back and become part of the Moscow Patriarchate. Just wasn't going to happen. Absolutely not. With this realization, the representatives of the Metropolia, prominent members, Father Alexander Schmemann of blessed memory, actually traveled to Constantinople and spoke to Patriarch Athenagoras and said, can you help us? And he said, you're Russian, go to Russia. And perhaps with that inspiration, Father Alexander Schmemann, Father John Meyendorff, also of blessed memory, and some others, very prominent people, began a dialogue with the Moscow Patriarchate. There's a very beautiful story that is recounted by a couple of people, but I heard it from Metropolitan Theodosius and actually found it in his writings. One of the primates of the Orthodox Church in America, who talked about the first time that Metropolitan Nicodim of then Leningrad, Petersburg, obviously, was in the United States, and he traveled to the residence of Metropolitan Leonti of blessed memory, out in Syosset, eventually where the Chancery of the Orthodox Church in America would be located. And Metropolitan Nicodim was there with some other members of the Orthodox Church in America, including Father Schmemann, Father Meyendorff, and Metropolitan Nicodim, as I say. And at a certain point, Metropolitan Leonti descended this very regal staircase, and he wore he wore a white cassock, he had a white klobuk on, and descended. And Father Schmemann and others described the scene very, very dramatically, that he was full confident of who he was and the church that he served. And the people who were there believed that Metropolitan Nicodim, beholding this, realizing that the church in America was something, not a caricature, not a disobedient child, but a real church, had to be reckoned with. And from that point on, Metropolitan Nicodim and others began the process of negotiating the tomos of Autocephaly. There was an agreement, and then there was a tomos. I'm kind of jumping through the historical structure with regard to all of this, but in a nutshell, this has happened, and it happened very much based on personal connections. I've heard told, anecdotally also, that figures like Archbishop Yakovas of the Greek Archdiocese, also of blessed memory, and others, neither part, not part of the Metropolia and not part of the Moscow Patriarchate, would say to members of the Moscow Patriarchate, some of your best theologians, some of the best theologians of Russian Orthodoxy are working in the United States, and you're not in communion with them. Can you explain that? And apparently that kind of movement was there. So you have the creation of this problem. What do you do with the OCA? You're not going to go back to the Soviet Union. The ecumenical patriarch says, you know, go go to Moscow. But you also have the third part of this. You also have the reality of other jurisdictions, churches here in the United States. So the question is, what do you do with the OCA? How do you make them canonical? Because at this point, they were under some canonical bans from the Moscow Patriarchate. So what happens? In this situation, this very, very difficult situation, the modern church took one of the bravest, creative, and most prophetic decisions, and that is to say, the Moscow Patriarch gave the Orthodox Church in America, the Metropolia, autocephaly. Now, this autocephaly, I want to say, is very creative. It's prophetic, but it's very creative, and it's not like we would necessarily think of autocephaly. And I would go on to say it's not like many other churches think of autocephaly, which has almost been the sticking point. We'll come back to that in just a moment. But if I can share the screen.
Yes, the screen. Yeah, go ahead. Yes, I set it up for you, Father.
Okay, very good. So I have, okay. I have here, can you see?
No, yes, we can
Yeah.
see. Yes,
We can
Okay.
we can see it.
Okay, so this is the Tomos of Autocephaly. This is the original translation that was done as a PDF. It's available on our website, oca.org. And you can see the creativity of this Tomos immediately. I love this line, and I'll be coming back to this in just a minute. This line here, where it says, in the hope that it might serve the good. Okay, I'm going to come back to that line. So just hold that and park it in your brain for just a minute. But autocephaly, it's named right away. The autocephaly confirmed in this decision, be independent, self-governing, firmly and utterly preserve the divine dogma, maintain direct relations with all other Orthodox churches and confession, enjoy all the authority, privileges, and rights herein, usually inherent in the term autocephaly in the canonical tradition, and the right in preparing chrism. And you're just like, oh, wow, fantastic. That's a great thumbnail canonical definition of autocephaly. So the OCA is autocephalous, just like anybody else, right? And we should expect everything autocephaly, just like everybody else. Yeah, right? No, because immediately the Moscow Patriarchate carved out a number of parishes that would remain within the Patriarchate of Moscow. In other words, what I'm getting at is inherent in the tomos of autocephaly is a creativity, that allowed for at one and the same time for the church, for the Orthodox Church in America, to be autocephalous, which I think is much more akin to saying canonical, yes, while at the same time recognizing the reality on the ground. So what could be done? A very creative application of the principles of autocephaly. So the OCA would be autocephalous, but it would also have to recognize that these Moscow patriarchal parishes, are here, plus the ones enumerated in 4, 5, and 6. Yes. In 7 through 8, the jurisdiction with regard the autocephaly of the Orthodox Church in America is enumerated, continues to be enumerated. But note here, it's almost like a passing reference at the end, the second paragraph after 13. The newly established local Orthodox Autocephalous Church in America shall abide in brotherly relations with all the Orthodox churches and their primates, as well as with their bishops, clergy, and pious flock who are in America and who, for the time being, preserve their de facto existing canonical and jurisdictional dependence on the national churches and primates. In other words, at no point in this Tomos of Autocephaly is the autocephaly of the Orthodox Church in America given the completeness of the autocephaly. I'm going to return to this because this is, while it seems like, we are given 3/4 autocephaly, I nevertheless maintain this is very much a prophetic act that was taken by the Moscow Patriarchate, Metropolitan Nicodim, and the others at the time, and also with regard to those members of the Metropolia, Father Schmemann, Father Meyendorf, and others who were instrumental in negotiating this tomos. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and come back because I prefer to be able to see everybody. So, inherent in that tomos is this weird tension between, yes, autocephaly, but not quite. Okay? And again, as I say, what else could be done? And to all of the detractors that I have encountered with regard to the autocephaly of the Orthodox Church in America over the years, I always want to say, what would you have done?
Ooh.
You know, it is what it is. And
Right,
at
right.
no point did the Moscow Patriarchate very intelligently, clearly, specifically, prophetically, and creatively, at no point did they ever say, the Orthodox Church in America, you enjoy unique territorial distinction, unique territorial rights, authority over the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Never said that. Inherent in the text, never said that. Subsequent bishops from the Moscow Patriarchate have tried to push us on that point, but there are some political reasons behind that. But at no point in the tomos was that done. Okay?
So
Now,
a side comment. So the Russian Church abroad story of 2007 kind of fits within this narrative that basically, logically speaking, a kind of Moscow may say we have the Autocephaly Church there, and the rocker in majority of its parishes in the US, being in the US, should deal with this Autocephaly Church, but it never was on the table along the lines of those parishes that were excluded in the first place, right?
yep, it's a very interesting point, and it just reinforces the reality of the tomos. This is something I would say. I'm going to turn to reflections on the autocephaly here in just a moment, but one part of this that within the Orthodox Church in America, I fear that many of our clergy and faithful don't understand this point. That inherent in the tomos is a reality not exactly the same as what is imagined when people speak about autocephalous churches. Okay, so I'm going to enter now the third part of my lecture at it's not hardly a lecture, my discussion this evening. Reflections on autocephaly after 50 some years. Um, I note with regard to this that this summer, not this summer, in coming summer, June 2025, we will be celebrating the glorification of Matушka Olga, a priest wife who lived, worked, labored in Kwethluk, Alaska, a tiny village, very remote village, in very rugged circumstances. What is special about this, and one of the reasons I bring this up, is she died in the period of autocephaly. Her sanctity contributes to the testimony, the legitimacy of our autocephaly. She was a wonderful, wonderful woman. I would note, just parenthetically, not about our discussion, her relics have been uncovered. They're removed out of the ground, and they reside now in the church there in Kwethluk, Alaska. The glorification will take place in the village, but it will actually take place in three parts. Just because of the remoteness of this, we have to kind of do maybe something a little bit different. But uh, in Kwethluk will be the first service, be a final panihida, vigil service, and then a divine liturgy. And then again in Anchorage, they will serve a vigil and a liturgy for her. And then at our All-American Council in July in Phoenix, we will celebrate the same vigil and liturgy and try and get as many people as possible to celebrate her, such as the great outpouring of devotion they have for her. One second. I note the irony, of course, of having the saint from the coldest state in the country being celebrated in one of the warmest states of our country. But anyway, yes,
Got a
John.
quick question. Do you know, so like because I watched the videos when they got the relics and but then like I didn't see like anything like in what condition were the relics. I mean, after I showed I seen the video where it transferred like the casket and then
Right.
the
She was buried in a copper casket, which is common in Alaska, metal alloy, and there was a lot of water that had gotten in to the casket. So her flesh and her tendons are no longer there, but her skeleton is complete condition. And so after they took the casket into the church, the bishop, His Grace Bishop Alexei, and others removed the bones from the casket and put it in a new temporary reliquary. Our nuns at our monastery in Calistoga, Holy Assumption, prepared. And so the new bones have been arranged, appropriately in the new casket. And then we're expecting a new reliquary. The clergy wives from the Orthodox Church in America have taken a collection to have a more permanent reliquary. Right now we have just a casket, the kind that anybody would be buried in, serving in this temporary fashion. So, but I note, as is common with native Alaskan women, she always covered her head. Many of the Alaskan women, no matter where they are, they always cover their head with kind of like a doily. Yeah. And then when they went to church, she covered her head also further. When she was buried with the babushka and then also this doily. The babushka is gone, but the doily actually left an imprint on her skull.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, so one more sign of with our autocephaly is the glorification of Matушka Olga, who died during the period of autocephaly. So questions, just kind of reflections on autocephaly at this point. Is the Orthodox Church in America autocephalous or not? Just to put it very starkly. I would answer that question with a very carefully constructed answer. We govern ourselves internally. We address our problems. Our problems, were spectacularly displayed over the internet not so many years ago, with very public accusations being sent back and forth. In all of them, we dealt with them completely internally. We did not take recourse, to other churches. We asked for no intervention from outside churches, to deal with any of them. We dealt with them internally. We elect our metropolitans without going above. We confect chrism, but even more importantly, we do missionary work. We evangelize in this country. Our clergy concelebrate across the board with all of the Orthodox churches in the United States. Even further, our clergy are regularly asked to serve, to fill in for these priests, when they go on vacation. We have seminaries, as Protodeacon Andre said, that serve all type of seminarians from all the jurisdictions. Our professors, as well as our priests, go out and teach, instruct, give retreats in the Orthodox faith. Our jurisdiction at present goes from the Arctic Circle down to Central America. So in almost every way, we function as an autocephalous canonical church, the canonicity of which is recognized by all of the jurisdictions here in America and all of the jurisdictions abroad. Do they recognize that as being fully autocephalous? Remember, that autocephaly was not given to us in the tomos. So we're talking about something different. So do they recognize our autocephaly? Yes. Yes. Do they recognize it as the way that they conceive of it? I will acknowledge, not everybody. But that's an important distinction to remember. As envisioned, the tomos of autocephaly that was given to us, and the autocephaly described therein, is an autocephaly, I would say, prove me wrong. Show me where people do not acknowledge that autocephaly. I myself have served with both the patriarchs of Constantinople and Moscow, Metropolitan Onufri. I've served on Marathos in Romania, in Bulgaria. In the United States, I've served with all of the jurisdictions. Just a personal testimony. Are we autocephalous according to that standard kind of canonical, that standard understanding that I mentioned at the outset? No, we do not have unique territorial jurisdiction here in the United States. But I also note that definition or that understanding of autocephaly, as I've said it at the outset, is something relatively new to the church and has as much to do with the Treaty of Westphalia and the modern understanding of nation states than it does with who we are. I note finally that at one point the Orthodox Church in America definitely seemed, without a doubt, a bit of an outlier. That is to say, we are the only kind of autocephalous church out there in the world in the way that we are. At present, though, I note that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church that is headed by Metropolitan Onufri, a blessed man, very much exists in a pattern very similar to us, the Orthodox Church in America. I note also that the Macedonian Orthodox Church, or the Church of Okrid, however you want to define it, at this point does not have its final autocephaly defined or given to them, but they exist also in a very similar state that we do. No one questions anymore the canonicity of Metropolitan Stefan and his church. People can celebrate. I met him recently. He told me they can celebrate in Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece. They go to the monasteries. With Constantinople, here in America, more and more Macedonian clergy are celebrating with the other local Orthodox churches. So once we seemed as a bit of an outlier, maybe in fact we're somehow an example of some new way moving forward to try and understand how the Orthodox world is going to deal with overlapping jurisdictions and overlapping claims. I'll conclude by just pointing out, saying, the promise and that prophetic nature of the tomos of Autocephaly, to be fair and to be completely honest and transparent with you, is something that will only be realized, as the Tomos also said. The full promise, the full prophecy that is contained in the Tomos regarding autocephaly will only be realized when jurisdictional unity is actually found in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. That is to say, found when it will be given fully by the grace of God, when He sees fit to give that. Okay? Anyway, thank you for your time this evening, and I'm happy, Brother Deacon Andre, if there's time, if people have any questions, I'm happy to answer some
No,
questions.
that's amazing that you are available, Father, and it was amazing. I mean, no, it was well structured lecture, and it was amazing. You really kept
The
all
only thing, the only thing preventing
my.
me from a couple of questions, I haven't eaten dinner yet, so my stomach might growl and grumble, and
No, no, no.
Holy
We
dinner.
definitely should respect it. We should respect this. That for sure. And we had not long ago discussion in Canon Law Committee of the Intercouncil Assembly, and I mentioned to that what the Russian Church did to the OCA. It's kind of in one extreme. Maybe Greeks have one extreme, but the Russians have another extreme because no one was consulted when no other Orthodox churches were consulted when the OCA's Autocephaly was issued. And Father Vladislav Tsipin, he agreed, but then he said, but we are not doing anymore. Yes, it was back then, but he kind of referring to what Fanar did to the church in Ukraine, because Fanar unilaterally intervened in Ukraine. But I kind of saw some analogies, some parallels with the CF to
absolutely.
and then what Fanar did, basically unilaterally intervening into Ukraine.
And now also what Serbia did with regard to Macedonia. So
Okay,
there are three modern examples with regard to this.
okay, all right. So, okay, brothers, fathers, questions from your end. I don't want to monopolize. So I know that Father John, he had a few ready and he's already smiling there, smirking. So, okay, Father, don't hold it.
Well, the question I have, just going off the reading from the Greek side in 1972, um, the Patriarchate of Jerusalem and Antioch, I mean, they did not recognize that as affiliate of OCA, obviously, because they envisioned like that's the Russia just trying to reach an arm out to North America to grab more territory. Obviously, we've seen through the span of 50 years that's not true, and OCAs function as autocephaly, like it's as its own church and not as another extension of Russia. But moving forward, is a OCA church trying to get like other patriarchates give them actual recognition as autocephalous church?
That's a great question. I would say, as it's funny, I could be retrospective now. As chancellor, I tried and advised His Beatitude to maintain a very broad-based, excuse this language. It's not churchly, but I hope you understand. But a foreign policy. That is to say, to maintain union with all of the Orthodox churches. So we actually believe, His Beatitude and I actually believe that we might be maybe one of two, three people on this earth who have actually been in the room and heard, for example, the position of the ecumenical patriarch with regard to Ukraine, and then been in a different room and heard the perspective from Patriarch Kirill. I don't know too many people who have able to go back and talk about that. But the policy has been to maintain communion with all of these churches. And as part of that, to answer your question, is exactly this. to just show ourselves as a faithful church, as an Orthodox church, and committed to maintaining the unity of the church, and without pressing the issue with regard to any of the churches. It's very difficult to negotiate, Father John, like one-on-one with churches. Can you respect our autocephaly or something like this? But just to go and be present in these churches, concelebrate where possible when invited, is the best way forward. So the short answer to your question is yes. The longer is it's very complicated. And I would say add on to this. At present, none of the Orthodox churches want to make any sort of recognition, full-on recognition of the Orthodox Church in America, even a perceived recognition, because no one wants to be perceived in taking sides with regard to Moscow or Constantinople over Ukraine. So no matter where their sympathies are, no matter how much they love us or don't love us, there's a kind of like, okay, we'll celebrate with you, but, don't ask for anything, essentially, because no one wants to be perceived. It's a very difficult time in the Orthodox world. What's going to happen in 2025? A new American president, the possibility, of a ceasefire in Ukraine. I don't know what's going to happen.
Right. Thank you. We have Dean Shedlovsky, who witnessed with his own eyes what was happening in Long Island and all drama. So, and any questions from your end, Dean? Any comments?
Well, can you hear me? Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah. First of all, Father Alexander, thank you. We saw each other a week ago in St. Vladimir's and with the Metropolitan and that sad event of Father John's Matushka passing away. But I particularly enjoyed Metropolitan's continual reference to the fact that she spoke to him in French.
Yes.
And he spoke back in French.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a language, this is our interrelations, which are so important and which I knew because of our family and because of my relations with the Meindorfs going way back.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the first time I've heard you, Father Alexander, presenting this perspective, and it's absolutely useful. So useful and so honest. As for myself, I would like to, my expertise is in a particular area. I'm basically a liturgical musicologist. My subject is liturgy. But having been in Jordanville for 5 years, God knows why, except that, as I said to Father Andre today, it's definitely for the salvation of my soul. I've learned many, many things, and I've had to think a lot of things through. And what I would like to suggest is that as a historian, we don't forget to look at what was accomplished in Russia in the 19th century and the early part of the 19th century in particular, because the first decades of the 19th century in Russia were decisive in many respects. There were so many things happening, and the Tsar was Alexander I, Nicholas I, and then you had the Decembrist revolts, and the emperors began to see the writing on the walls that their leadership was being challenged and may eventually have to disappear, which it did. But what the intellectual and cultural climate at that time achieved in the first 50 years, let's say, of the 19th century was extraordinary. And I'm hoping that we don't forget that, and that we look at people who are. I will start with one of my favorites, Alexei Khomyakov. I mean, what that man did for the mind of the church in his day and for the future, lasting up to us today, is extraordinary. And we need to not forget that and keep looking at his writings, some of which is available in English, but most of it is not, actually. It's a very curious phenomenon. We need to get his stuff translated into English. We'll work on that. Then you had people who picked up on him, and whatever you think of the new martyr Ilarion Troitsky, with what he wrote, is amazing. It has yet to be really looked at thoroughly, but today, maybe that's what we need most. When the Autocephaly has a place in American Orthodoxy, there's no question about it. You don't have a unique jurisdiction in the US, but you have a function. I'll never forget how Father John Meindorf once said to me, well, Nikolai, autocephaly is an experiment. We'll see if it works, but let's move. And that's what they did. They didn't sit still, they moved. And that's what I admire very, very much. So the issues aren't ecclesiological. We're beginning to address them head on here in Jordanville in a very, I think, positive, creative, and I don't know how to say, we learn to argue. Nothing wrong with arguing, nothing wrong with discussing, and this discussion is extremely important. I wish it would bubble up to the top services of our bishopric, who would agree to engage and embrace all the things that are challenging in North America. I say North America because for one reason or another, mysteriously, historically, start with Father George, we have plenty of antecedents, but in the modern period, Father George Florovsky's arrival in America was not a small event. He pulled in Father Schmemann, Father Meindorf, and these people came here because they felt there was something to be done here. And then, of course, the populations that moved here after the wars and filled our churches. This is a reality and a mystery that we have to, I think, embrace. The good Lord wants orthodoxy in North America.
Amen.
And I firmly believe that. I even go as far as saying that we are now living in a new chapter of Orthodox Church history, because North America has become a rallying point for Orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. So that's about it from my end. I'm sorry I spoke too long.
Thank you.
I appreciate, let me just respond very quickly. What you say about the 19th century, Pernodigan Andre mentioned that I studied at the Pontifical Oriental Institute in Rome. The field of my study was liturgical history, where the Russian
Father Taft, or who just
Father Taft, yeah. And the Russian liturgical scholars, Dmitrievsky or Krasnoseltsev, Rentel, these are the giants. Or even in the field of canon law, Vladislav Benishevitz is like Vladimir Vladislav.
Vladimir.
Benishevitz, is like this still a great figure that we still have. You mentioned Khomyakov, and as soon as somebody mentions Khomyakov like this, I think the families of Dostoevsky, or sometimes even Tolstoy, Chekhov, and Gogol should get a royalty for when people convert many times, because whether it's the Bishop or um, Crime and Punishment, Karamazov, whatever, any of these great novels or novella, they were so influential. Khomyakov, but I mean, translating Russian spirituality and the vision of an integrated life as understood, by these great authors, was as fundamental to the church, at least as I was growing up, as anything. So I welcome everything that you say and agree with you 100%.
Well, the problem is Russia went through this. Look, Russian culture is difficult. It's complex. Our publication of Father Alexander's reflections on the foundations is an achievement, because few people besides Father Alexander Schmemann could speak with the authority that he did on this topic.
I agree.
Today we need to embrace all of this and move on. That's all I can say.
Amen.
Well, I mean, seems to be like natural stop, and thank you, Father, very much
Absolutely.
for finding time, for being with us. It's I don't know how many times. That's really highlight and very valuable contribution to this class and to the seminary and to the notion that we are the church.
Absolutely.
Amen.
All right.
Father,
Thank you all.
good night. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.